The night trembled with the weight of betrayal as torches burned low in the forgotten courtyard. Thomas clenched his fists while Marcus commanded, "Strike him down." His heart pounded like a war drum, his breath jagged in the cold air. The prisoner whispered, "History will remember." Thomas felt sweat drip down his temple, though winter's frost numbed his fingers. Marcus smirked as if savoring blood before the blade. Shadows flickered along the cracked stone walls, echoing centuries of forgotten vows. The crowd's whispers rose, hushed and venomous, as loyalty and treachery tangled like smoke in the sky. In that instant, Thomas's world tilted. If he obeyed, his soul shattered. If he refused, his family risked death. The fire's glow lit his trembling jaw, and he whispered within, "What is the worth of honor if silence buries us all?" The prisoner's whisper echoed through Thomas's mind long after silence returned. He turned from the chains, but Marcus' voice lashed like steel, "Do it, or you doom us all." Thomas's knees weakened as he pictured his family waiting in the dim cottage. His mother's frail hands clutched prayer beads. His brother's laughter haunted his thoughts. Lucas leaned close and hissed, "He is nothing. End this." Thomas's eyes darted to Lucas, his childhood companion cloaked in treachery. The wind howled through the broken battlements, carrying ash and doubt. Fear pressed at his throat, yet something inside stirred fragile but unyielding. Narrator whispered that history's turning moments are forged not by kings, but by men trembling between mercy and obedience. The silence grew heavier than iron as Marcus's voice cut through. "The kingdom demands loyalty." Thomas's chest burned as whispers surged around him. Lucas's smirk hid beneath false concern. The prisoner's gaze pierced him, showing not a captive but a mirror. His hand brushed the sword hilt, but it felt poisoned. Narrator said that in crumbling kingdoms, loyalty is currency and betrayal the cost. Soldiers shifted, torn between duty and conscience. Above them, the moon cast long shadows, as if heavens bore witness. Thomas's soul quaked as destiny demanded a voice he did not wish to give. The prisoner spoke again, voice trembling yet resolute. "If you kill me, the truth dies with me." The words pierced Thomas deeper than steel. Marcus's rage hardened as his grip on the dagger tightened. Lucas's whisper returned oily and sharp, "Strike now before you lose everything." Thomas's heart pounded louder than the crowd's murmurs. His eyes locked with the prisoner's in silent plea. Torches hissed sparks into the night like broken promises. Narrator intoned that silence in history screams louder than thunder. Thomas trembled as the world demanded a sacrifice his soul could not bear. With trembling resolve, Thomas lowered his hand from the sword, his defiance burning brighter than torches. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Marcus stepped forward, fury blazing. Lucas's jaw clenched, hiding venomous satisfaction. The prisoner whispered, "You chose to remember." The choice became a spark, igniting the storm to come. Narrator declared, "Kingdoms fall not in silence, but in defiance carved into stone hearts." Citizens whispered, some fearful, some emboldened as frost swirled in the bitter air. Marcus hissed, "You will regret this rebellion," dagger glinting in firelight like judgment waiting. Thomas stood taller despite trembling legs, his soul bleeding yet unbroken. The council chamber reeked of smoke and secrecy, its walls lined with torn banners of past victories. Marcus spread a map across the oak table, his fingers stabbing at borderlands, declaring, "The invaders will break us unless we strike first." Thomas stood at the edge, silence gripping him as the voices of warlords clashed like steel. Lucas leaned closer, whispering poison in Marcus's ear, their alliance tightening unseen chains around the kingdom's throat. The prisoner's words still haunted Thomas, though he dared not speak them here. Narrator revealed that power finds cracks in fear, and Marcus knew how to widen them. Every flicker of torchlight revealed hungry eyes, men not seeking peace but crowns. Thomas felt his pulse hammer in his skull, for shadows now guided their fate, and treachery wore the mask of loyalty. The chamber doors groaned as citizens were ushered inside, faces pale with fear. A woman cried, "Our fields burn, Our homes fall. Marcus raised his hand, feigning calm, yet his eyes glimmered with ambition. He spoke, "Sacrifice is the price of survival." Thomas's chest tightened at the words, each syllable dripping with cruelty hidden beneath reason. Lucas's smirk curved like a blade as murmurs of agreement stirred the council. Narrator said that in frightened hearts, lies often sound like salvation. The citizens' voices rose in pleading despair, but Marcus' voice drowned them, a tide swallowing their cries. Thomas wanted to speak, but his tongue felt shackled. The weight of silence crushed him, and his soul cried louder than any words he could not form. Night bled into the city as whispers traveled faster than fire. In the marketplace, abandoned stalls stood under cold lantern light, their shadows long and thin. Lucas moved among the fearful, his words laced with venomous persuasion. "Marcus is our only hope." His voice carried like wind through cracks, feeding fear and sowing loyalty in poisoned soil. Thomas walked unseen, his cloak wrapped tight, watching old friends fall under deceit. Narrator said that betrayal begins not with the blade, but with a whisper, sweet enough to taste like truth. The kingdom's streets, once alive with laughter, now echoed with silence broken only by the crack of wood as doors slammed shut. Thomas felt the weight of history grinding against his chest. The prisoner was dragged into the lower dungeons, chains scraping like screams against stone. Marcus descended the steps, torch in hand, eyes glowing with hunger. He leaned close, whispering, "Your truth will die with you." The prisoner spat blood, answering, "Truth cannot be strangled by fear." Thomas lingered at the archway, his chest trembling as he saw Marcus's cruelty laid bare. Lucas shadowed Marcus, smirk sharp as ever, eyes gleaming with quiet triumph. Narrator said that kingdoms collapse not in thunder but in quiet corners, where mercy is strangled. The damp air thickened with rot and smoke, walls dripping like wounds refusing to heal. Thomas's fists clenched, torn between silence and defiance as shadows devoured the last remnants of light. The night silence was shattered by war drums echoing across the hills. From the ramparts, Thomas watched fires flicker on the horizon as the invaders pressed closer. Marcus stood proudly, arms folded, his lips curling in satisfaction. "Let them come, history favors the bold." Lucas whispered into his ear, his words lost beneath the drums but his eyes revealed calculation. The prisoner's warning thundered in Thomas's skull, louder than drums, heavier than steel. Narrator said that fate often arrives wrapped in smoke and flame, demanding tribute in blood. The soldiers on the walls shifted uneasily, their armor rattling in rhythm with fear. Thomas's heart broke as he realized the kingdom's last stand had already begun. The bells tolled as Thomas walked through the ruined streets, his boots striking against stones slick with frost. The citizens cowered in doorways, eyes wide with fear. A child's cry cut the silence, shattering his heart. He remembered when these streets were alive with songs, but now despair bled into every corner. Lucas appeared, his smile twisted with mock concern, whispering, "You cannot save them, but you can save yourself." Thomas's fists clenched, his chest heaving, yet his voice failed him. Narrator said that courage often grows not from strength but from wounds that refuse to close. The prisoner's words still echoed in his mind, louder with each step. Thomas knew the time for silence was dying, even if his tongue still trembled behind his teeth. Inside a crumbling chapel, Thomas knelt before shattered icons, his hands trembling. He whispered to himself, "What do I have left to fight for?" His breath fogged in the cold air, the silence broken only by dripping water. The innocent witness entered, Anna, her young voice soft, "You fight for us." Thomas turned sharply, seeing her frail frame, yet her eyes blazed with unbroken hope. His chest ached as he saw her innocence standing against despair. Narrator spoke that kingdoms may crumble, but hope finds shelter in the smallest hearts. Thomas's lips quivered, torn between fear and the fragile spark she carried. He bowed his head, his shoulders heavy with the burden of destiny, yet the ember within began to glow. The night deepened as Thomas and Anna walked through the empty courtyard. She clutched a lantern, its glow pushing back the dark. "They need you," she whispered. Thomas shook his head, muttering, "I am no leader." Yet the firelight caught his eyes, betraying doubt that trembled into resolve. In the distance, soldiers murmured of retreat, fear spreading like sickness. Narrator said that in the darkest hours, leaders are not born. They are forced by shadows. Anna's hand touched his arm, her warmth breaking through the frost of despair. His chest tightened, his steps steadier, as though her belief carved a path where none existed. For the first time, Thomas lifted his head, no longer only fleeing his own fear. On the ramparts, Thomas stood gazing at the horizon where fires burn. Marcus strode forward, his cloak whipping in the wind, voice sharp, "We strike at dawn, or we perish." Soldiers murmured uneasily, fear etched into their eyes. Thomas spoke at last, his voice rough yet firm, "We fight not for your crown, but for our people." Gasps rippled through the line as Marcus's glare burned into him. Lucas's smirk returned, like venom hidden beneath silk. Narrator revealed that defiance born in silence becomes thunder when spoken. Thomas's chest ached, but the weight in his voice shook the air, stirring the soldiers' hearts. For the first time, he saw their heads lift, their eyes shining not with fear, but with fragile hope. In the quiet that followed, Thomas walked alone along the walls, lanterns flickering in the wind. His hands trembled, but his steps grew steadier. Anna's words echoed, "You fight for us." He whispered, "I will not let them erase us." The prisoner's defiance returned to his memory, binding itself to his resolve. Narrator said that history's heroes are rarely born ready, they are carved from hesitation and fear. Below, the citizens huddled, eyes watching him as though he carried their last light. Thomas clenched his jaw, and in that moment, the reluctant hero began to fade, and a defender of the forgotten kingdom was born. The night stretched long, but dawn would demand blood and courage alike. Dawn painted the sky in blood-red hues as soldiers gathered in the courtyard, their armor rattling like broken chains. Marcus strode forward, cloak snapping in the wind, and declared, "We march to glory or perish forgotten." Thomas stood among them, heart pounding as eyes turned toward him with silent expectation. Lucas whispered venom into their ears, warning that hesitation was treason. Anna clutched her lantern at the edge of the crowd, her gaze locked on Thomas as though her belief alone held him upright. Narrator said that moments of choice arrive like storms, tearing away shelter until only truth remains. Thomas lifted his chin, fear clinging to him like frost, yet defiance burned brighter within. The clash of wills had begun, and no voice could remain silent. The council chamber filled with heated voices as Marcus slammed his fist against the table, snarling, "Cowards cannot defend a kingdom." Thomas answered at last, his voice rough but steady, "Bravery is not blind slaughter but standing for our people." Gasps rippled through the chamber as Marcus's glare pierced him like steel. Lucas stepped between them with false calm, whispering poison disguised as reason. Anna stood near the doorway, wide-eyed, her faith growing stronger with every word Thomas dared to speak. Narrator said that truth spoken in defiance cuts deeper than daggers, reshaping the battlefield long before swords are drawn. The chamber walls seemed to tremble under the weight of voices, history pressing its hand upon their shoulders. Night returned with whispers of betrayal crawling through the city like smoke. Thomas moved silently through alleys, watching Lucas meet cloaked figures beneath the arch of the old gate. Lucas spoke low, his words sharp as daggers, "The walls will fall from within." Thomas's chest clenched, rage and sorrow wrestling within him as he realized his friend had become the kingdom's shadowed enemy. Narrator said that the cruelest wounds are carved not by strangers, but by hands once trusted. The lantern in Thomas's hand trembled as his resolve deepened, no longer for himself, but for all who would bleed because of lies. The wind howled through broken shutters, carrying secrets too heavy for silence. On the ramparts, Marcus rallied soldiers with promises of victory, his voice booming against the wind. "The enemy will break before us," he roared. Yet Thomas stepped forward, his own voice rising, "The people do not need your glory. They need protection. Soldiers exchanged uncertain glances, torn between steel and conscience. Lucas's eyes darted nervously, his schemes threatened by Thomas's defiance. Anna clutched the battlement stones, whispering a prayer only the night could hear. Narrator said that battles are first fought in hearts, where the pull of fear and faith tear men into fragments. The fires of invasion glowed on the horizon, and in that moment, the clash of wills threatened to shatter their fragile unity. The clash erupted in the courtyard, not of blades, but of voices. Marcus shouted, "Obey, or be branded traitors." Thomas stood tall, his words shaking the air. Obedience without honor is the death of a kingdom. Soldiers froze, their loyalty split, eyes flicking between commander and reluctant hero. Lucas's fury seethed behind his mask of calm, the web of betrayal tightening unseen. Anna's voice rose suddenly, fragile yet piercing. "Stand with truth, not tyranny." Narrator declared that when innocence speaks, even steel listens. A silence heavier than stone pressed upon them, as if the fate of the kingdom rested upon a single breath. In that silence, the lines of war were redrawn not by swords, but by courage. The dungeons reeked of damp stone, as Thomas descended with Anna close behind. Her voice trembled. "We must see him." The prisoner lifted his battered head, his eyes burning with fire that chains could not extinguish. He whispered, "The kingdom is not lost, for its heir still breathes." Thomas frowned, confusion clawing at him. Anna's breath caught as the prisoner's eyes locked on her, filled with recognition. Narrator revealed that history hides its heirs in silence until storms uncover their names. Thomas staggered, his mind unraveling as the weight of truth fell upon Anna. She gasped, "You mean me?" The prisoner nodded with grim resolve. Blood remembers, even when crowns are forgotten. The shadows thickened, carrying the birth of a revelation that would change everything. The torch sputtered as silence consumed the chamber. Anna shook her head, tears brimming. "I am no heir." The prisoner answered, "Your bloodline carries the last flame of this kingdom." Thomas's chest tightened, his heart torn between disbelief and duty. Marcus entered with Lucas at his side, their faces masks of suspicion. "What secrets do you whisper here?" Marcus demanded, his voice sharp as steel. Thomas stepped in front of Anna, shielding her from their gaze. Narrator said that truth once unmasked cannot be buried again, though many will try. Lucas's eyes narrowed, recognition sparking, his smirk faltering. The torchlight flickered, shadows stretching long across the walls, as if the stones themselves bore witness to the unveiling of destiny. Marcus's voice thundered, "An heir? Lies meant to fracture us." He stepped closer, dagger glinting in his grip. Anna whispered, "I never asked for this," her hands trembling at her sides. Thomas's voice rose, "She carries their hope, whether you accept it or not." Lucas' smirk returned, cold and sharp. "Hope will not stop steel." Narrator declared that power always fears truth, for crowns are brittle when weighed against legacy. The prisoner strained against his chains, shouting, "Protect her, or all is lost." Torches hissed as sparks spat into the stale air. Thomas's fists clenched as he planted himself between Marcus and Anna, his choice sealed not by loyalty, but by the fire of justice. The council chamber roared with voices as Marcus denounced Anna, calling her a fraud sent to divide us. Yet whispers of her bloodline spread quickly, each rumor striking like sparks in dry hay. Anna stood trembling before them, her voice fragile but unyielding. "I will not claim a crown. I will claim our survival." Thomas stood beside her, his jaw set like stone, while Marcus's fury twisted into venom. Lucas whispered poison into soldiers' ears, urging them to doubt. Narrator said that revelation is both blade and shield, cutting enemies while binding allies. The firelight flickered across faces caught between fear and faith. In that moment, the kingdom itself seemed to balance on Anna's trembling voice. Night fell heavy as the truth spread like wildfire. In the courtyard, soldiers gathered torn between loyalty and revelation. Marcus shouted, "Follow me and crush this false heir." Thomas's voice answered with thunder, "Stand for her, stand for the kingdom." Anna's voice rose, fragile yet piercing. "I am not your queen, but I am your kin, and I will fight beside you." Narrator said that destiny does not always crown kings. Sometimes it crowns courage in trembling hands. Lucas's eyes darted, schemes unraveling, while Marcus's rage burned hotter than the torches. The soldiers' eyes shifted, many stepping closer to Thomas and Anna. The first cracks of rebellion split the air, and the forgotten kingdom began to stir awake. The storm broke with thunder rolling above the fortress, rain slashing across stone as war drums pounded beyond the walls. Soldiers gripped their weapons, fear etched into their faces. Marcus roared, "Tonight, history crowns the bold." Thomas raised his voice against the storm, "History crowns the just." Anna stood at his side, cloak soaked, lantern extinguished by the rain, yet her eyes burned with defiance. Lucas slipped through shadows, his schemes twisting like snakes unseen. Narrator declared that battles are not written in scrolls, but carved in blood and breath against the storm. The prisoner's distant cry echoed from the dungeon, "Stand or fall, forgotten." The gates shuddered as the enemy's charge thundered closer, shaking stone and soul alike. The gates exploded inward with fire and splintered wood, invaders surging through with steel flashing. Marcus led the charge, blade raised high, eyes burning with ruthless hunger. Thomas clashed steel against steel, every strike a vow not to yield. Anna darted among the wounded, lifting fallen spears, her courage blazing brighter than torches. Lucas whispered to soldiers, urging retreat, but some turned their backs on him, choosing instead to follow Thomas. Narrator said that loyalty is tested only when the night seems endless. Sparks flew as blades met in rain-soaked fury, screams mingling with thunder. The forgotten kingdom bled, but within its walls flickered a light that refused to be extinguished. Steel clashed louder than thunder as Thomas and Marcus met in the heart of the storm. Marcus sneered, "You think mercy makes you strong." Thomas's blade trembled under the force of his strike, yet his voice rang out, "Mercy is what makes us human." Sparks showered from their blades, shadows flickering across their strained faces. Lucas lurked near the wall, ready to strike from behind, but Anna's cry rang out, warning Thomas. Narrator revealed that betrayal hides best in shadows, yet even shadows falter when light pierces. Marcus pressed harder, his fury unmatched, but Thomas's resolve hardened with every desperate breath. The kingdom's fate narrowed to two blades clashing in the storm, each strike carving destiny into stone. The duel raged until Thomas staggered, blade slipping from his weary grip. Marcus raised his sword for the killing blow, shouting, "History remembers the victor." At that moment, Anna hurled a torch, flames bursting between them, forcing Marcus back. Lucas leapt from shadows, dagger gleaming, but Thomas spun, catching his strike. "You were my brother," Thomas shouted, his voice breaking. Lucas's eyes wavered with guilt before narrowing again, striking harder. Narrator said that betrayal always carries the face of love, making the wound eternal. Sparks, fire, and rain fused into chaos as friend and foe collided in final reckoning. The air shook with thunder and the roar of defiance. The courtyard burned with fire and storm as Thomas struck Lucas down, his dagger clattering against stone. Lucas whispered with fading breath, "I had no choice," before silence claimed him. Marcus roared with rage, charging again, but Thomas's blade found his chest, ending his tyranny in a single strike. The soldiers froze, stunned, before cries of defiance turned into roars of unity. Anna stood at Thomas's side, her voice carrying through the storm, "We are not forgotten." Narrator said that kingdoms do not endure through crowns, but through those who dare to bleed for memory. Rain washed the blood into rivers across the stones, as dawn's first light broke the storm. The final stand had been made. The storm eased as dawn broke across the blood-stained courtyard, smoke rising in thin spirals from dying fires. Thomas stood trembling, sword lowered, rain mixing with tears upon his face. Anna placed a hand on his arm, whispering, They will remember. Soldiers gathered, their armor battered, their eyes hollow yet alive. Narrator said that victory tastes of ash when bought with betrayal and blood. The prisoner, freed at last, limped forward, his voice weak yet resolute. The kingdom lives because you chose defiance. Thomas looked across the ruin, haunted by faces that would never rise again. The wind carried the scent of iron and smoke, mingling with fragile hope. A silence settled over their scarred homeland. The bodies of the fallen lay beneath torn banners, crimson pooling into the cracks of stone. Thomas knelt to close the eyes of Lucas, whispering, "Brother, you chose the shadows." Anna lowered her gaze, her voice trembling. Even traitors are mourned. Marcus' lifeless form lay sprawled near the gate, his dagger still clenched in stiff fingers. Narrator said that in the wake of war, sorrow spares no side, binding friend and foe alike in silence. The soldiers lowered their heads, murmuring prayers that drifted into the smoky air. The kingdom's heart beat slower, wounded but unbroken. Thomas's chest ached as he rose, carrying grief heavier than armor. Yet in his eyes flickered the ember of endurance. The citizens gathered slowly, emerging from shattered homes and broken streets. Children clung to mothers, eyes wide with both fear and hope. Anna stepped forward, her cloak torn, her voice trembling but clear. "We rise again together." Her words rippled through the crowd, fragile yet fierce, like the first spark of dawn. Thomas stood behind her, his shoulders heavy, yet his presence unyielding. Narrator said that kingdoms are not rebuilt by stone alone, but by voices that dare to speak after silence. The prisoner raised his hand, voice raspy. "She carries the blood of your past and the courage of your future." The citizens bowed, not to a crown but to survival. The chapel bells tolled weakly, their cracked voices echoing across the battered streets. Thomas lit a single candle, flame trembling in the cold air. Anna whispered, "This is not an ending, it is a beginning." Soldiers and citizens knelt together, their prayers mingling with the sound of dripping water. Narrator said that faith stitched wounds when steel could not, binding the broken into something stronger. The prisoner bowed his head, whispering thanks for a freedom dearly bought. Thomas's gaze lingered on the flame, seeing not only loss but promise. The walls of the forgotten kingdom stood scarred, yet the hearts within began to beat with new defiance. Hope glowed softly, fragile yet unyielding. As dusk fell again, Thomas stood alone on the ramparts, the horizon painted in fire and fading gold. He whispered, "We are remembered, even if forgotten by history." Anna approached, her lantern glowing softly, her voice calm. "The kingdom lives in those who endure." Narrator said that memory survives not in crowns, but in scars carried forward. The wind tugged at their cloaks, carrying the scent of ash and earth, a reminder of what was lost and what remained. Thomas's eyes closed as silence wrapped the fortress. In that final moment, the forgotten kingdom stood not in stone or throne, but in the hearts of its last defenders. The story ended in smoke and silence, yet hope lingered like an unbroken flame.